Have you ever reacted in a way that didn't feel like you? Not just overthinking, not just a bad mood, but a moment so sharp, so strangely out of character, that even while it was happening, part of you stood back and thought, where did that come from? A sudden explosion over something small. The urge to ruin a relationship right when it starts to feel safe. The instinct to disappear the moment life offers you something real. The jealousy that arrives too fast, too intense, too ancient to belong to the moment in front of you. We like to believe we are the authors of our behaviour. Calm, rational, self-aware. But beneath that polished story, something older is watching, something quieter. And when the pressure is right, it takes the wheel. What if these reactions are not random? What if they are not personality flaws, bad luck, or emotional accidents? What if there is an invisible operator inside you, working from behind the walls of your identity, shaping your impulses before your conscious mind can explain them? Not a monster, not a separate being, just the parts of you that were buried so deeply, you learn to call their absence who I am. Because the truth is, the most dangerous parts of you are often the parts you buried to survive. The anger you were told was unacceptable. The need you were taught was weakness. The hunger, resentment, fear and power that had no safe place to go. They did not disappear. They went underground. And once you realize that, a more unsettling question begins to form. If something hidden has been influencing your life this whole time, how much of you have you actually been living? The first time you were divided, it probably didn't feel violent. It felt ordinary. It sounded like guidance. Be good, don't cry, don't be angry, share, smile, calm down. Say sorry, even if something inside you still burned. And because you were small, because love was survival, because belonging was everything, you listened. That is how the fracture begins. A child does not have the luxury of asking whether acceptance is honest. A child asks only one question: what must I become so I am not abandoned? So you learn very quickly which emotions bring warmth and which ones make the room go cold. Joy is welcome, but not too loud. Sadness is tolerated, but only if it is quiet. Anger is dangerous, neediness is embarrassing, defiance is punished, desire is shamed. Bit by bit, the nervous system learns a brutal equation. Some parts of me keep me safe, and some parts of me threaten love itself. So a performance is born, not all at once, but carefully, strategically, almost beautifully. You begin constructing a socially acceptable version of yourself. The false self, the edited self, the face that gets rewarded, the one that knows how to be agreeable, controlled, pleasing, useful. And because this version works, because it earns affection and reduces pain, you start mistaking it for your identity. But the rejected parts do not die just because they are unwelcome. They go underground. Every feeling you had to silence, every instinct you learned to mistrust, every impulse that made others uncomfortable gets pushed below the surface of personality, not healed, not transformed, exiled. And in that exile, those parts begin to change. What could have been felt becomes stored. What could have been expressed becomes compressed. What could have been understood becomes hidden, watching from the dark. This is the shadow in its earliest form. Not evil, not broken, but banished. A private graveyard filled with everything you once needed to survive by pretending you did not feel. And the most unsettling part is this. Repression does not make those buried forces weaker. It only makes them invisible, which means the person you became may not be the whole story at all. It may only be the version of you that was allowed to stay in the light. Most people imagine self-destruction as something dramatic, a collapse, a public ruin. But the shadow is rarely that obvious. It is quieter than that, more intimate. It works through timing, through attraction, through mood, through the sudden certainty that you should say the one thing guaranteed to damage the moment. It does not announce itself as sabotage. It feels like instinct. That is why it is so difficult to catch. You think you are making choices in real time, weighing options, following logic, trusting your gut. But beneath that surface, hidden emotional patterns are already moving. Old wounds do not speak in full sentences. They speak in flinches, in cravings, in distortions, in the private panic that rises when you feel rejected, criticized, ignored, humiliated, or left behind. And when those buried memories are touched, the shadow does what it was trained to do. Protect you by taking control. Suddenly, success feels dangerous, so you procrastinate right before the breakthrough. Love feels unsafe, so you become drawn to people who cannot truly choose you. A small comment lands like an insult, and your anger burns far beyond the size of the moment. You say you are fine, but your resentment leaks out sideways through silence, delay, sarcasm, indifference. You tell yourself you want freedom, but secretly organize your life around being approved, admired, validated, reassured. Not because you are weak, because somewhere inside, an older version of you still believes survival, depends on managing emotional threat before it can strike. This is what makes the shadow so disturbing. It does not always ruin your life by force. Sometimes it ruins your life by preference, by teaching you to want what hurts you, by making chaos feel familiar and peace feel suspicious, by convincing you that the patterns exhausting you are simply who you are. And the most frightening part is this: what feels most irrational is often psychologically meaningful. The overreaction, the compulsion, the jealousy, the self-hatred, the need to retreat right when things begin to open, these are not random glitches in an otherwise healthy machine. They are messages from the parts of you that never stopped living beneath the surface. Which means if you want to understand your behavior, you cannot just study what you do in the light. You have to descend into the place where your hidden motives first learn to speak. The shadow does not arrive like a thought. It arrives like weather. Sudden rage that feels too large for the room. Envy so sharp it almost feels personal, even when nothing was done to you. Obsession that grips your attention long after reason has gone silent. Shame that floods the body before the mind can explain what crime was committed. Resentment that lingers for days, then weeks, then quietly reshapes the way you look at someone. This is how the buried self speaks when it has been denied language. Not through calm explanation, but through emotional possession. That is why certain people affect you with a force that seems almost unnatural. They touch something they did not create. A tone of voice, a kind of confidence, a softness, a neediness, a cruelty, a freedom. And suddenly your reaction is no longer about them alone. It is about the part of you that was forbidden, shamed, or pushed underground long ago. The intensity feels current, but the source is older, much older. And then there is projection, one of the shadow's most elegant disguises. We condemn in others what we cannot bear to recognize in ourselves. The arrogance that infuriates you may mirror your own buried hunger for power. The weakness you despise may be the vulnerability you were never allowed to show. The selfishness you attack may be your own exiled desire to stop performing, stop pleasing, stop disappearing for the comfort of everyone else. So the mind does something clever. It relocates the rejected trait. It makes someone else carry it, so you can hate it at a safe distance. But what is buried does not stay still. It repeats. It loops. The same relationship with different faces. The same wound wearing new clothes. The same humiliations, same cravings, same collapses. Cycling through your life as if guided by an intelligence you never consciously chose. Because unresolved emotion does not vanish with suppression. It becomes more strategic. The more the conscious mind says, I am not angry, I am not jealous, I am not afraid, the more aggressively those denied forces return, demanding expression through pattern, through symptom, through pain, guise the shadow long enough, and it does not become weaker. It becomes louder, stranger, more invasive. And eventually, the question is no longer whether it is shaping your life, but how far it has already gone unnoticed. In the modern world, the mask is no longer just a defense. It is a currency. You are rewarded not for psychological honesty, but for image control, for looking stable when you are unraveling, for appearing attractive, intelligent, successful, desirable, unbothered. The performance is no longer occasional. It becomes a full-time identity, refined in public, rehearsed in private, and quietly mistaken for the self. Social media did not create this hunger, but it industrialized it. Now the personality can be edited, curated, filtered, measured, and displayed with terrifying precision. Every reaction becomes data, every appearance becomes strategy, every moment carries the hidden pressure of being seen. And under that pressure, people do not move closer to themselves. They move closer to what can be accepted, admired, and consumed. So the public identity grows, and the authentic identity starves. That is the real danger, not vanity, not superficiality, but disconnection so deep that many adults no longer know what they genuinely feel unless it is extreme enough to break through the performance. They do not know what they actually want, only what looks impressive from the outside. They do not know which parts of their personality are real and which were assembled from approval, fear, imitation, and survival. The self becomes a hall of mirrors, and somewhere in that reflection maze, the original voice goes quiet. This is why the shadow becomes strongest inside highly controlled identities. The more perfect the persona appears, the more pressure builds underneath it, because every forbidden emotion, every ugly impulse, every doubt, every dependency, every hunger that does not fit the brand gets pushed downward, compacted into silence. And what is buried under pressure does not disappear. It ferments. So sometimes the most polished people are not the most whole. They are simply the most defended, the most rehearsed, the most terrified of being caught without the costume. And the tragedy is that after enough years of performing, even they begin to forget where the mask ends and the wound begins, which raises a darker possibility. If your identity has been built around being seen a certain way, what happens when the buried self finally decides it can no longer breathe underneath it? And here is the twist almost no one wants to hear. The voice in your head is not the enemy, not the chaos, not the contradiction, not even the part of you that keeps ruining what you say you want. What if that voice was never trying to destroy you at all? What if it was trying, in the only language left to it, to be recognized? Because the shadow is not evil. It only begins to look evil when it has been ignored for too long. What you call self-sabotage may be a buried part of you slamming its fists against the walls. What you call emotional chaos may be the return of feelings that were never given a name safe enough to survive in daylight. What you call darkness may actually be rejected life. Parts of your identity cut off so early, so completely, that when they finally resurface, they no longer know how to arrive gently. Inside the shadow is not just rage. There is buried anger, yes, but anger is often the guardian of something more vulnerable. Beneath it may be humiliation, grief, powerlessness, the memory of being silenced. Inside the shadow is also suppressed ambition, the drive you learn to restrain so others would not call you too much. Hidden creativity, because originality is dangerous when love depends on fitting in. Denied vulnerability, because softness once came with punishment. Forbidden desires, because wanting too honestly once threatened belonging. The shadow becomes monstrous only after years of exile. That is the part that changes everything. The monster was not born a monster. It was made through abandonment, through shame, through the long discipline of pretending entire regions of your humanity did not exist. And the longer that exile continues, the more distorted those rejected parts become, not because they are corrupt, but because anything deprived of air eventually starts to break form. So the war was never really against darkness. It was against disowned humanity, against the parts of you that carried truths your conscious identity could not afford to admit. And once you see that, the entire struggle changes. The question is no longer, how do I kill this part of me? It becomes something far more dangerous and far more honest. What would happen if I finally turned toward it and listened? The dangerous part of seeing yourself is that for a while nothing feels clean anymore. The old story begins to crack. The mask no longer fits as comfortably. Reactions you once blamed on other people start pointing back toward rooms inside you that have been locked for years. And this is where integration begins. Not with healing language, not with forced positivity, but with the decision to stop moralizing your own emotions. Because the moment you stop asking, how do I get rid of this? You can finally ask the question that matters. Why does this trigger me? Why does this person, this rejection, this silence, this success, this intimacy reach so deeply into me? What part of myself did I bury to become acceptable? What emotion was never allowed to exist without consequence? That is the real work, not suppressing the impulse, not obeying it either, investigating it. Shadow integration is not permission to act out every dark instinct and call it authenticity. It is not cruelty, indulgence, or chaos dressed up as honesty. It is the slow, often humiliating process of becoming conscious of the rejected fragments that have been living through you without your awareness. The anger you judged, the need you denied, the ambition you made smaller, the fear you converted into control, the tenderness you buried under detachment. Integration means bringing these exiled parts back into view, not so they can dominate you, but so they no longer have to sabotage you from the dark. And something profound begins to change when that happens. Self-blame starts losing its grip. You no longer see yourself as broken in some vague, permanent way. You begin to see pattern instead of curse, history instead of defect, meaning instead of madness. The same behavior that once made you feel ashamed starts becoming legible. Painful, yes, but legible. That is where real freedom begins. Not when you become perfect, but when unconscious behavior becomes visible. Because what is visible can be faced. What is faced can be understood. And what is understood no longer needs to control you from beneath the surface. But once you truly see the shadow, another question waits in the dark. What kind of person are you willing to become when you are no longer hiding from yourself? Most people never fight the real cause of their suffering. They fight the symptoms. The ruined relationship, the sudden anger, the chronic emptiness, the need for approval, the quiet self-contempt that follows them from one phase of life to the next. They change partners, careers, cities, routines, even identities, hoping a different surface will free them from the pattern. But the pattern is not on the surface. It is underneath, waiting. That is why unconscious suffering is so patient. It does not need your attention to survive. It only needs your avoidance. And once avoided, it begins to repeat itself with terrifying loyalty. The same pain appears in different forms. The same fear hides inside new ambitions. The same wound puts on new clothes and introduces itself as destiny. What you do not understand within yourself will keep finding ways to meet you from the outside. Because the shadow does not disappear when it is denied. It deepens, it adapts, it learns your language. Buried emotions do not die quietly, they wait. In your reactions, in your choices, in the moments you call instinct, chemistry, fate, or personality, never realizing how much of your life has been negotiated by forces you refuse to name. And that may be the darkest realization of all. What controls you most is usually what you refuse to see. So when this ends and the noise of the video fades, the real question remains. How much of your life has truly been conscious, and how much of it has been lived by the parts of you still moving in the dark?